Okay, so for a little peek behind the curtain on this devlog, I set a precedent with the last video that these would be, funny. So I was thinking of things that I could do for an intro, and I was like, oh, I got it. I got a great idea. This is going to be so funny. And then I went, whoo! And that was the audio. That's the audio I got. So when I was editing this video, and I heard, whoo! At the start of the video, it's like, what the fuck do I do with this? This isn't anything. Anyway, At the Ends of Eras is now complete. Thank you. Please validate me. But don't validate me too much. I don't mean the game is done, because it's not. What I mean by complete is, it has a beginning, middle, and end, because I finally made a tenuous narrative thread for the game's plot. That might not sound like much, but in the 9 years I've been making games, do you know how many complete games I've made? I'll give you a hint. Count the number of games on my itch.io page. It's less than that. Most of my game projects fail for various reasons. I get worn out on technical issues, the design gets too bloated, or I suddenly feel like the game isn't going anywhere. And I've realized all of these stem from the same problem. Getting to the point. What is the point of your game? Why do you want it to exist? Why should anyone care? It could be a single mechanic, an environment, a conversation, an emotion. The place I've consistently failed is, I'll make prototypes and designs, but they won't actually get to the point of my game idea. Instead, I'll get distracted by other features I think should be in the game and start on those. When motivation starts running low, I'll look at what I've made and just see a pile of aimless prototypes and disconnected tech demos and not feel like it's anything worth keeping. Let's list some game ideas and their fates. An adventure game where you take photographs of things to accomplish various tasks. I wound up endlessly tweaking the basic movement until I did something else. I didn't even implement the photo-taking mechanic. A 3D platformer with various power-ups based on everyday objects. I spent several days trying to make Godot's baked lighting look good. I only implemented one item. A house sim where characters have procedural conversations based on parsing a semantic tree into full sentences. I got hung up making all the animations for mundane actions. The conversation system was never implemented. A game where you stop and rewind time with tools similar to a tool-assisted speedrun. I got sidetracked with custom collision detection and making my own Vulkan bindings for the D programming language for a custom engine. The only evidence the game exists is a program that can determine when two moving spheres collide. All these games had a point, but I would get overwhelmed by the full design and start working on the wrong things. You'll see this with a lot of game developers, where they spend a very long time, sometimes several years, working on various technical aspects of a game without ever getting to the point. And in most instances, they give up. So my advice for people who struggle in the same way I do is to just get to the goddamn point. Your game design is not better because it's bigger and has more things. You're an old man rambling. You tried to walk to the grocery store, now you're in the middle of a 4-lane highway. What are you doing there, Grandpa? Get out of the road. Make something that demonstrates the most interesting part of your game and nothing else. This is basically the same advice as making a prototype, but my advice is completely different because I'm slightly recontextualizing it. The advice isn't just to make a prototype. My advice is to make sure you're prototyping the right things. Don't confuse things you know will be in the game with the point of your game. For At the Ends of Eras, I had all the basic movement, collecting, combat, dialogue, and coats in about a week. This could be called the prototype since those mechanics are how you interact with everything, but they aren't the point of the game. The point of At the Ends of Eras is the plot, specifically the way the plot interacts with the game structure. The player talks to an AI based on the player character's memories. Then, the player goes out and learns new information in an open world. When they return and talk to the AI again, it's changed based on the player character's new knowledge. It has new things to say or a slightly different personality. That set of interactions is the point. It's the thing I find interesting and want to explore. So when I decided this was the game's story, I should have put everything else on hold until I'd written a first draft of the plot and integrated it with the gameplay. It didn't need to be great, it just needed to get to the point, so I could see it in action and figure out how to build the rest of the game on top of it. Instead, I worked on everything else I could think of. I started on side content, I wrote lore, I fiddled with visuals, I prototyped minigames, I modified Godot to add stencil buffers for perfect underwater rendering even though you can't swim, and I wound up not using them anyway because of other technical issues. You see, that sort of behavior is where my projects often come apart. Before I've actually made the interesting part of the game, I'll start adding extraneous features or going down technology rabbit holes. I shouldn't have even started with the gameplay. I should have started with the interaction between the player, the world, and the AI in the simplest possible test environment I could manage, maybe just a 2D plane or a text box, and only started on the final gameplay once I'd developed the point of the game to a complete state. So as an exercise for myself and to demonstrate for the video, I decided to brush off an old game idea and try making what I think is a proper prototype that actually gets to the point of the game. Meet Drone Savior, one of my 3 game ideas using that name. This one is like 40 lines or so in a text document, but I daydreamed about it quite a bit years ago. It had all sorts of big ideas. I wanted it to be a 3D Metroidvania with hack-and-slash combat. I imagined all the characters and their interactions. I developed plans for the visuals and the music and the story. I had so many ideas, in fact, that I implemented nothing and left the game to rot. I was completely overwhelmed by the amount of work I'd made for myself. But nothing I mentioned was even the point of the game. The point of the game was a combat system with a few specific upgrades that could synergize with each other to alter the gameplay. So, for a prototype, I started by making the menu for the 4 upgrades I thought were the most interesting. And then I made the simplest combat system I could think of that would let me demonstrate the upgrades. I built outward from the point of the game. This is another game I wanted a custom engine for, but again, that wasn't the point. So it's using Godot 3, which I'm familiar with and is fine for prototypes despite its other shortcomings. The game I'd imagined was 3D, but 3D isn't integral to the point, so it's gone too. You are a default Godot sprite with a stick. You hit other default Godot sprites to unlock upgrades and hit them better. This isn't the game I imagined, but if I have to remake the entire game, oh how tragic, look at all this code I have to replace. Here's all of the code in this entire demo versus the code for just the player in At the Ends of Eras. In total, it only took about 2.5 hours to make, and I wound up with something that feels more like a complete video game than most of my prototypes because I focused on just what I thought made the idea interesting and just enough to demonstrate it, rather than everything else I imagined in the game. In fact, it's fun enough that I'll probably just wrap it up and package the prototype as a full game instead of going through with the whole 3D Metroidvania thing. But this isn't the Drone Savior devlog, so I'll save it. What all this means for At the Ends of Eras is, I finally spent a few streams writing out the basic narrative thread with all the important features and plot points. I'd already imagined how it would work and how the plot would unfold before I'd even started making the game, so when I set everything else aside and just did it, I was able to outline the plot and make it work in like 3 streams. It was a lot less painful than I was imagining. But now that I have it, I'm feeling a lot better about the game. Publishing the first devlog is what made me realize how bad of a state the game was in, because the parts that I was most eager to talk about weren't even implemented. The plot is still just a skeleton of what I want, but I can see what I want, and I've developed a plan for how to integrate everything together. And with it, I'm more confident releasing the game for playtesting pretty soon, since I can finally get feedback on things I care about. I'll probably do that sometime in March through the game's Discord server, which I made after the first devlog and then never announced, so it's empty. Well, thanks for watching. If you want to join the Discord server, you can through the link in the pinned comment, and if you want to watch the full development, you can check out the VODs here on YouTube, or you can watch it live on Twitch. There's like bumping from my cabinets, and I don't know what it is. I think there's like an animal somehow that got into this apartment. Wait, hang on. It's coming out now. Alright, it's some kind of possum, and he has a gun.